Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Crown Zenith, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to have a sneak peek of the Japanese metagame. We're going to be looking at some of the top performing decks in early City League tournaments that they are having right now. These are small events, roughly around 30 to 70 or so players, but we are starting to get an inkling of the new post-rotation Scarlet and Violet EX metagame. Now, it is still early days. These tournaments have only been going on for roughly a week or so, but we have started to see these City League tournaments, and we are starting to see deck lists as well of new archetypes and how other archetypes have adapted. Now, looking at the graphic of the current City Leagues that have taken place, it does look to be a Lost Zone fiesta. 54% are either Giratina or Lost Zone box style decks, so it really does seem like we are going from one S tier meta where Lugia is on top to a new S tier meta where Giratina and Lost Zone variants are on top. Maybe disappointing for some people to hear with seeing how much of a meta share one or two decks are taking up that have a very similar engine, but I must stress this is still very early days in the Scarlet and Violet meta. These are still smaller scale events with much less on the line, so people may just be bringing certain archetypes or unrefined lists of other archetypes, as now we will start seeing the knee-jerk reaction of decks coming out in the next week or so, or few weeks, of decks trying to target Giratina, as always with top archetypes, as we've seen with Lugia. Eventually people work out ways that you can exploit the best deck in the game and then have good matchups into it and have counter strategies. But as of right now, it does look like the early metagame is showing that Lost Box in general, the Giratina and the One Prize builds, are the S tier contenders in the game. In tier 1, with 9.3% and 9% respectively, we have Miraidon EX variants, mostly alongside Regieleki VMAX, as well as Mew VMAX variants. Both the Fusion Strike and the Judge Path builds, both are being successful in Japan right now. And then looking at the sort of tier 2 stuff, which is getting notable percentages here. Lugia decks mostly using single strike energy, some having other energies in there as well, which we'll talk about, as well as Palkia V-Star doing pretty well. A few different variants going around with Palkia, which is really interesting. And then the new Gardevoir EX card is also starting to see some showings here and there. It's mostly having like lower placements within like top 8s, top 16s, not quite breaking into those top 4s and finalists just yet, but that could also be a sign of just how new and fresh this deck is. People are experimenting with the ideal 60, so we haven't yet seen the full power of Guardy. I would start to expect that number to slowly increase as we start getting more and more refined lists. And there's still 17.1% of other decks being played right now in these tournaments, 2 top 8 finishes, so there is still a little bit of diversity in the metagame. It's not just these decks that you're seeing. These are the ones we're going to be discussing today, though. So we're going to start off with a Kyoto first place list of Giratina Lost Zone box. There is only one new card from the Scarlet and Violet EX sets here, and that is the Beach Court Stadium card that reduces the retreat cost of basic Pokemon by 1 colorless. The whole emphasis of this deck is to reduce the Comphase retreat cost by 1 so we can get that flower selecting rolling. It's trying to fill the gap of Scoop Up Net, and Scoop Up Net going actually in many cases can help Lost Zone engines, because we know that Lost Mine damage counters and Cramorant hits, they stay. That damage just sticks on board forever now. We have usually not much healing unless people are actually playing proactive healing cards. So we just know that damage can be calculated much more easily with a deck like this. And of course, Star Requiem, one of the biggest strengths of Giratina V-Star, is great at dealing with V-Stars, V-Maxes, and EX Pokemon. So it has that reach into those higher echelons now that we need to get to, which is fantastic, and there aren't many ways you can defend against a Star Requiem. We lose Parasol, we lose Wash Water Energy to rotation, so the Star Requiem is just a detonate button at any point in the game, and your opponent cannot prevent that. It's just going to happen at some point. So all of these things come together to make Giratina what looks to be the strongest deck in the format right now. It still is a very similar shell to what we've seen previously. Notable includes now are Clara, which typically wasn't in the deck previously. It was typically a ordinary rod, but of course that rotates. and it is still playing a huge number of switches and switch carts. I'm a little bit surprised by just one escape rope. I would imagine we're going to start seeing higher counts of that in other Giratina lists. This just happens to be one take of the deck list, but as we start seeing tech cards slowly creep in to the meta, I would expect higher rope counts, because things like Klefki's can sometimes be an issue for this archetype. Also, Regieleki V trying to use that lightning wall in the early game can be problematic for Giratina, so it wouldn't surprise me if we started to see some of those switches and switch cart counts go down in place of some ropes. But in general, I think this is a really, really solid list. Very similar to what I've been trying so far in the metagame. Don't think there's many supporters that I would look towards. I think oftentimes you can see things like a very low count of Ultra Ball, like 1 or 2 copies of Ultra Ball come into the list, and sometimes you'll see Luminion, and then that gives you reason to play possibly like a Judge or something on top of that. And even just giving you extra access to your V-Star, because you just have pure dig in the deck, no actual search tools for your V-Star, so that can sometimes be something you can go for. And also sometimes you see a split of Nest Ball and Fog Crystal, just so you have the flexibility of getting attachments to either retreat your Comphase if you haven't found Beach Court, or to use and springboard off with your Radiant Greninja. But Nest Ball's still a really strong card. You do try and develop early Giratina V in many instances. You have the Drapion V to help out against the Mew players. So it seems to be just this well-rounded deck. It has a good variety of single prize attackers, and the beat stick potential of Giratina seems to be much stronger in the next set. Next up, we have a few different variants of Lost Box doing pretty well. We go back in a bit of a time capsule now that Stoutland is no longer that huge threat in Lugia, where we can have the sort of slower roll of Charizard in some Lost Box variants, knowing that your early game and mid game can be covered by Crams and Sableye. That's why you're seeing some Lost Vacuums coming into the list. That's why you see a huge amount of switching cards, the carts, the ropes, and even cross switchers making their way back into the 60, because you know that your late game oftentimes involves using Clara to recycle your Radiant Charizard. The one new card that we're seeing in this list is actually going to be the Hawlucha, that has the flying entry ability, allowing you to put one counter on 2 different bench Pokemon. So very similar to Galarian Zigzagoon that we've seen in the past. It's specifically very strong against Giratina, which is currently the best performing deck, and the Mirror Match, which is the second best performing deck. So a really important tech card where you can target 2 Comphase and then immediately Sableye Sprinkle both of them for KOs. And of course, bear in mind that people can't just pick up Comphase anymore with Scoop Up Net, so that damage stays. That's why you're seeing a couple Level Ball in addition to your Nest Balls, because you want to have Hawlucha to hand to then gain its flying entry ability. But yeah, it seems again to be a very straightforward, simple list. Pokegears are something that I expect to be quite popular in Lost Boxes, just to make up the slots, really, because it becomes just more and more important to find those choruses and not miss your chain of that supporter card, as we are losing a good portion of strong cards like Scoop Up Net that would currently fill up these slots. We have to find appropriate replacements. We're even seeing Echoing Horn come back in here. This can have all sorts of applications, especially when you play cross switches. You can make a big combo happen with Rad Charizard. You can try and make a combo happen with your Sableye. Just seems to be very versatile. And some of the issues plaguing Lost Box right now, like Ice Cube Wash Water and Pikachu with Parasol, well, Parasol rotates and Wash Water rotates, so now there aren't really any checks to just playing this purely basic attacking deck. You have Sableye that can get through the Pikachu and the Ice Cube, so not much of an issue. You can carry on with your day. So yeah, it seems to be a very strong archetype going into the new meta. We also have a Kyogre Lost Box. Now, interesting thing about the Kyogres in particular, they typically couldn't use Clara as well as Charizard builds, because simply Claring would get you either your Sableye Psychic or your Charizard Fire. You would put them immediately into play and use them, whereas Clara is much worse in this build because you often used Ordinary Rod to put energy back into the deck to then get them out of the deck with Mirage Gates. So we're trying to sort of make up for that by just having a huge amount of energy recyclers. We're playing 3 copies now, so that you just have a pure dig into the deck, or sorry, a return of energies back into the deck often, and a huge chunk of them. Obviously, this is in part because of your big Kyogre combo, but there are also Zamazenta, which I'm a huge fan of in Kyogre Lost Box in the standard format. We have Greninja that we can still snipe with, and we have that Hawlucha for Sableye Sprinkles. I'm a little bit surprised about the one Cramorant, but this deck is playing one Clara and two of the new Miriam supporter, which allows you to choose up to 5 Pokemon from your discard pile and shuffle them into your deck, then draw 3 cards. This is kind of like the pseudo Bird Keeper that we've been seeing in recent Kyogre builds, because it gives you that draw 3 option, and it can be a great way for you to recycle the one Zamazenta, the one Cram, even getting reuse out of Sableye, or if something like Greninja is targeted, you have that instant recycle. I actually think the one Clara might just be worse than Miriam's in general in this deck list, so I wouldn't mind just seeing 2 Miriam and then the Recyclers to come in, but I was actually very skeptical of Mirage Gate builds of Lost Box, but they seem to still be hanging on in there, and I think in part it's because you have this Miriam supporter, which fills that Bird Keeper niche of seeing more cards in the game without having painful Lost Zones the entire time, adding to your overall support account in the first place, and giving you some Pokemon recycle that we are losing in the form of Ordinary Rods. So it feels a niche that I wasn't necessarily expecting. I've been typically thinking of Miriam going into like some Stage 2 decks and whatnot, but it seems to fit a really nice niche where Miriam is just getting 1 Pokemon back, but it's a draw 3 on top of that. So seems a little bit niche, but really fits this one prize deck quite well. This was a top 4 list from Okayama on Feb the 5th. But yeah, again, a very similar shell to Kyogre Lost Box, so this seems to be going nowhere as well. On to Mew then, as we drop down to the Tier 1 decks that we're expecting. We have a top 4 from Kyoto D on Feb the 5th, and this is a Fusion Strike build of Mew. There really aren't too many things to highlight here, just a few things to note. You may look at a lot of Japanese Mew lists and they won't all have maximum copies of Cram. That's because it's a far more expensive card in Japan than it is in English. It was a specific promo card in Japan, so you might see a number of lists just playing Trekking Shoes instead of Cram, or other cards just to fill in those niches, but I have happened to found one that is playing the 4 Cram. It does seem to still be the strongest way to play the deck. And filling in the slots really for Quick Ball is going to be a couple Nest Ball, but also a couple Feather Ball. Now, from my testing so far, Nest Ball is really quite cloggy in Mew. I think going above that 2 count really does come with those risks. So things like Feather Ball might slot in. They, of course, get your Mew V or your V Max. Things like Great Ball might even be coming into the deck list as well. These are things that I have my eye on as cards that, you know, Great Ball's previously actually been in Mew before we had the reprint of Ultra Ball, if you can remember. It was Quick Balls and Great Balls. So I wouldn't be surprised if we started to see some Great Balls coming into the deck list as well, because you also want to have that access for Genesect. I have even seen Capturing Aroma, if you can believe it, going into some Mews, because it can get you on that Tails flip, I believe, a basic Pokemon, and on the Heads flip it can get you a Mew. You actually are probably rooting for Tails most turns to try and get you more Genesects, but that could also be another option instead of Great Ball. Feels a little bit counterintuitive, but it's another sort of coin flip, and at least you're guaranteeing a Pokemon if you want to just cycle through the deck. Outside of that, it seems to be a very straightforward Judge. It's playing the Sparkle, but it is also playing 2 Judge and a late game Roxanne Path package. Not too surprising from what we've seen previously, but it seems to have the go aggressive option. It seems to also have a couple of hand disruptors in there, which seems really important for the Lost Box and Tina meta. It's very similar to what we've seen so far, where Judge is preferred over Marnie. Obviously Marnie's gone in post-rotation, but right now we're playing Judge to block Oranguru and whatnot. But yeah, this seems to still be playing Lost Cities, which is a bit of a surprise as well. It might be down to some like Miriam recycle and some Clara recycle, so you're just blocking that from Lost Box players. That could be a big reason for it. So there is still some tech for the one prize decks, and it is still trying to tempo out and be disruptive in that late game as well. Then we move on to the more typical Judge-based build of Mew, which is playing the Oricorio for some extra tanking. It is playing cross switches instead of that super high boss count, and it is playing 3 Judge and the Roxanne as well as a very high Path count. It seems to be the Path deck in the game right now, whereas Giratina wants to be using its Greninja, and Guardy, of course, wants to be using its own ability. Miraidon is definitely an ability of focus deck with those Regielekis, so it does seem like the premier Path deck is now Mew of all things. And again, we're seeing that Feather Ball plus Nest Ball split going on in here. Nest balls do just have such diminishing returns, and they are so cloggy that I wouldn't really be happy going above that 3 count, as I've already mentioned. But outside of this, pretty straightforward. Judge Path Mew still getting decent results. Here's a top 4 from the 8th of Feb. Then we go on to an early Miraidon EX list. So for those of you unaware, the Miraidon's tandem unit can get those lightning basics into play very easily. And this deck is all around trying to get lots of Regieleki VMAX into play to buff up the Photon Blaster damage, to buff up Raikou V's damage as well, to really allow you to have big uptrade potential into VMAXs and even Giratina. I'm surprised to not see a Drapion in this list. Drapion is quite popular actually in a lot of the Miraidon lists. I wouldn't be too surprised to see it in optimal 60s because it gives you a much better time into that matchup. But the deck is choosing to play a couple Klefki. Now Klefki is super interesting because this deck can utilize Regieleki V's first attack, which does a 30 hit and run, and you can use this to go into your Prank Lock. Now Prank Lock does have some anti-synergy with the deck because you want to be using your Greninja, you want to be using Miraidon as early as possible, but Klefki is also really, really annoying for Mew players and Lost Box players, which are all the decks we've talked about so far. So every engine, and even in the mirror, everything doesn't want to be coming up against a Prank Lock. So if you can use a Beach Court to retreat into a Klefki to end your turn, or use this switching attack from a Regieleki, it can be a great early game option to slow the opponent down, make them have escape ropes and such in hand, otherwise they're really going to struggle. At the same merit, we can buff our 30 damage hit from Regieleki V with our V maxes, and they can actually be knocking out things like Comphase and Crams, and then you're still going back into those Klefkis whilst taking prizes and shutting down their engine further, which can be a really nice option. You can see one Judge in the deck, maybe increasing that count could be helpful as well. And then one final note is that you have the very strong attack from the Regieleki V as well. It's actually one of the biggest selling points of the deck, having this Eleki V. The Lightning Wall is basically a mini Goodra. You do 100 damage and you reduce 100 coming into you next turn. So the final play you can make with Klefki is have the Lightning Wall up in the active, you've taken your knockout, you're reducing 100 coming into you. Your opponent naturally wants to escape rope around this because otherwise their damage output is pretty poor. And then you send the Klefki into the active and suddenly you're stopping a Cramorant from hitting into you. So it can be another way to slow down the opponent's tempo and force them to have rope boss combinations. And even just if they have ropes, you're stopping their Comphade development at the very least. So the Klefki seems to be a really nice card at blocking certainly some Lost Zone engines, but also can sometimes be a real headache for Mew players at the same time. Outside of that, a couple other new cards in the deck. The Electric Generator is the energy acceleration of the deck. It's the new Max Elixir. You look at the top 5, you can choose up to 2 basic lightning energy and attach them to your benched lightning Pokemon in any way you like. This has massive high roll potential, and that's why you're seeing such a high count of basic energy. 14 to 15 is where I've been landing on my early deck lists. We're seeing it the same here, and it's even playing one of the new Arven supporter. This deck is only playing one tool, but it is a Forest Seal Stone, so turning your one of Arven into finding your best card in the deck, the Elixir, that's the main thing that gets you rolling, as well as a comp search, sounds excellent value. I've actually been trying out EXP Share as a 1/2 count in the deck list in addition to Forest Seal Stone. I've also toyed around with Skysteel Stone as an option because Giratina is so popular and you're already playing Raikou in the deck list, plus Mew is so popular and Drapion can easily take a 4-prize turn. So I think we could be leaning heavily into the Arvens and playing 2/3 copies possibly as well. These are things that I've been exploring. But really interesting to see the Klefki. It does have some minor anti-synergy with your deck, but the hope is that you play enough Beach Court, you play enough Switch cards, that you can get Klefki out of the active so that you can use your tandem units, fill your board up, and then be jumping in and out of the active position with your Elekis, which is a very solid option in the deck. On to Lugia then, a bit of a fall from grace. It has been the top contender pre-rotation, but it's getting a massive makeover in the new format. It's having to take advantage of whatever special energy we have left, and it seems like these are the best ones. This is a Kanagawa first place, so still actually getting some results. And I mostly like the ball search engine that's being employed here. I've seen a number of Japanese Lugia lists playing a high nest ball count. Doesn't make much sense to me. I definitely think Capturing Aroma and Great Ball are the best options for allowing you to have access to your V-Star and those Archeops, just to bin them off in the opening stages, be it Read the Wind, be it with your Serena's or Boss's Order, research, I should say, to get rid of your stuff. So I really like the one Nest Ball and then committing to the other Ball search. That's how I've been working with it so far in the deck. And having the Luminion as well as a 2 count when you have Capturing Aroma and Great Ball then means Professor Burnett is actually a very usable supporter in the format, just to guarantee those Archeops in the discard pile so that you are firing on all cylinders. Let's have a look at the New Age attackers then. For 1 prizes, it's a far contrast from where we've been, but Meloetta can burst 280 damage all in a turn, because you can double Archeops for all of your Fusion Strike energies into play, and that's why you're seeing Meloetta and 2 Deoxys in the deck. Deoxys can be a good 1 prize v1 prize option with the fusion energy, with the DTs and whatnot. This is pretty reasonable. And then we have 2 pretty decent type coverage mons, the Stonjourner being an additional 1 prize attacking mon that has good fighting type coverage, which is really good for the Miraidon players and any Arceus players roaming around. And there's also the Tyranitar as a 2 count. Now, Tyranitar also has some headache for decks because it does mill the opponent's top decks with its first attack, and you can buff that, of course, with Single Strike Energy to knock out 1 prizes. The second attack, though, does 240 base damage, so just having 2 Single Strike Energies means it's able to knock out Giratinas, and of course its Dark type coverage means it can trade into Mew VMAXs very easily. So Tyranitar, surprisingly, is looking like one of the better attackers in Lugia. Now, I have seen some builds completely scrapping the Meloetta package and just playing the single strike mons, just a high account of the Stonjourners essentially, and having spaces committed to the likes of more V-Guard energies, more gift energies, some lucky energies possibly as well in the list rather than fusion strike energies, or just a higher earn count. Can definitely be a play. The Sparkle is interesting to me, though, to give you an extra 1 prize uptrade burst, similar to how we had things like Yveltal in the past. It does commit both of your Archeops to 1 knockout, but it is a detonate button, which is looking pretty appealing for the deck, which is looking pretty okay, to be honest. So it wouldn't surprise me if we start to see more of this sort of mix and match between single strike and fusion strike in the deck, so you have that big burst play, but we can't really protect these fusion energies quite as well, and they can end up prized, so the Meloetta may be left wanting a little bit and only come off in a small number of games. I think the other thing that makes me a little bit nervous about this list in particular is that it doesn't have many Stadium Bouncers to path, and it has quite a low Lugia count, so possibly simplifying this deck list, as always, may be a better policy going forward, but it ticks a number of boxes. It doesn't look too different from the current Lugia shell that we know, and it does have a good mix of match of 1-hit KO potential with your 2 prizes, as well as some 1 prize threats going on as well. So Lugia is adapting, but it still is somehow remaining more of a tier 2 threat, because that energy acceleration is still insane, even with some slightly less good Pokemon to take advantage of it. Onto Gardevoir EX then, still a card that I'm extremely hyped on. It has that ability allowing you to attach Psychic Energy from your discard pile to your Psychic Pokemon in any way that you like, but you have to put 2 counters on for each Psychic Energy that you do, so you are a little bit limited here, and that's why you're seeing a couple interesting includes in the deck. Radiant Serena can be a great way to essentially allow you to do an extra ability from the discard pile onto one of your Pokemon, and you'll notice there's 3 Gardevoir non-EX in the deck, and this is actually, in many occasions, your main attacker. I've been seeing a number of lists just playing like 1 Glade, 1 Baby Guardy, but I think Guardy is the biggest part of this deck, so I think a 2-2 split or a 2-3 split is going to be the more common amount of Gardevoir, especially in a list like this where it's playing Champions, Festival, as well as the Radiant Serena, as well as an Emergency Jelly. All of these actually kick in and are very, very helpful to allow you to damage your Gardevoir so much that you get a reload of sometimes 7 energy plus turn attachments plus Raihans. You can actually get to that sort of 300 threshold with your 1 prize mon, and that is the way you will catch up in prize races, using your regular Guardy and then trying to recycle them with the likes of Miriam and even the rescue carrier in here as well. One thing you'll notice is we are playing a split of the Curliers. We are trying to use the Curlier that duplicates your other Curliers into play and cheats evolution. I've seen a number of different ways to try and build Guardy. There are a number of them employing this turn 2, I'll use my Curlier approach, And then there's a number of them playing like VIP passes and taking up a lot more space just to get more basics into play. I've mostly tested the list that just tries to play VIP pass and get your curliers out the old-fashioned way and trade as much as possible. But I do need to put more time into this curlier duplicates option because it does save a lot of space, and I am pretty excited about that option. The deck has a V-star power in the form of Skysteel Stone alongside Zacian V. Zacian, this is the Celebration Zacian that can, again, you can put 10 energies on this Zacian just from your ability, so we're already in the 330 realm, and then you can turn attach and use right hand and all this other stuff, so this can be an absolute beat stick when need be. And of course, if you're using Skysteel Stone, it means you can take a 4-prize knockout onto Mew players. So this is actually a pretty strong list. The one takeaway from this that I'm really interested in is Raihan. I haven't played much Raihan in my 60 so far, so it's definitely something I'm interested in. It could be a very strong option. I should also mention that it is playing Klefki's to slow people down. The Ralts actually has a 10 damage hit and run option as well, so just throwing a Klefki into the active can buy you some time. I think the alternate option for this deck is if you play Celebrations Mew and Greninja rather than Radiant Serena, you can have a deeper dig into the deck and see more item cards and try and have bigger pop-offs. That's kind of the alternative here. I think the Mew is better in a VIP pass based build, of course, though, because there's such a big power spike if you can see those in the opening stages. But really happy to see Guardy seeing some success. I will note as well that to have a better time into Giratina, oftentimes we are seeing a Mewtwo V Union package being played, but I think it really does clunk up the deck quite substantially, and it doesn't take much for Giratina to counter you with just one part of the peak. So I wouldn't mind seeing a deck more like the one we're seeing right now going ahead in the future. We also have a Palkia list to have a look at. Now, Palkia is an interesting one. It loses, obviously, a ton to rotation, but it's still finding a way to be pretty successful. There is another build of Palkia that has seen a little bit of success as well. It actually uses the Gardevoir draw engine and has a late-game finish combo of the Kyogre that we see used in Lost Box alongside energy retrievals and such. And that's a really interesting deck that I haven't really given enough time to or whatnot. It's something that we actually could be playing in current standard, essentially, to see how it functions. So it might be something I put some time into. But we are seeing more straightforward lists of Palkia also doing pretty well, with Ice Rider Calyrex coming into the deck. That high Irida count is definitely still a selling point of Palkia with so much tutor into the deck. It is definitely good news. We've got a Bibarel line coming into the list, as well as your Greninja draw engine. You have that Drapion V option. There are a couple new cards in the list, but the Defiant Band is one we haven't yet talked about, and it can allow you to deal 30 more damage when you're behind. So you've got the belt, but you also have the Defiant Band for reaching higher numbers into EX Pokemon in particular, which is definitely helpful. But yeah, it seems to be a pretty straightforward build of Palk Ice Rider. We saw a number of these sorts of lists at Worlds, actually, with unconventional, non-Inteleon engines, and it still seems to be successful. Ice Rider hits some really relevant numbers. The Irida engine is still looking pretty reasonable. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw things like Cross Switches come back into the deck as well, because Irida is still such a big part of this list. But overall looking pretty nice, and even using those Lake Acuities to try and stay out of range of Tina, forcing some extra outs from them, seems pretty reasonable as well to me. So yeah, Palkia still keeping up in tempo and being a reasonable deck in the format. So that is everything. These are the deck lists. Let's go back to that tier list. This is still early days, like I said, of the Japanese metagame. I've been toying around with some slightly varied lists, but also using a lot of inspiration from PokekaBook.com as well as How News to keep an eye on deck lists. I've been chatting to a number of people. I've been doing a lot of play testing already in this format, so I'm really excited to get going with the set review and with other content. And essentially, I just couldn't wait. I wanted to start looking at these deck lists because I think a lot of people are going to start looking towards post-rotation, because Crown Zenith, it's not completely no stone unturned, but we have learned a lot about the format already, and it's not too big of a change from what we've already been playing. So I think already we're going to start casting our eyes to that new format. So let me know if you are more interested in post-rotation content, or if you want to still see some Crown Zenith meta stuff. I think we are going to be hybriding and sprinkling between the two. But yeah, not long now till the set review. I'm doing a ton of testing in this meta, so I feel like I've got a really good grasp on it already. And I'm going to be keeping my finger on the pulse with Japanese decks. Let me know if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.